three major themes that we wanted to tackle. The bigger overarching issue was naval ways for racial healing and dissolving the boundaries of race and ethnicity. So we had three major themes, one of which was history, or let's say educational history and awareness, respect and equality, and the third was open communication and dialogue. And so we were able to tackle the open communication and dialogue. And so what we wanted to do was try to create a system, or how do we capture and how do we get rigor around that one problem, like creating an open dialogue where differences, common bonds, and everything else could be respected. So we started with Diversity and Communication Summit. That was kind of the overarching idea. One of the students from Middleton came up with that idea, and they said the schools have to be involved. So we kind of started with the who. It would be the students. The students would be based on a diverse population. The key to this would be the principal. We probably should have started there. So ideally, we want buy-in from the principal. If we could get buy-in from the principal, use that momentum then to get buy-in from the school, from the county or Hillsborough County school system, and figure out a way to not only create an awareness by utilizing public schools, but also private schools as well. So when you're talking about diversity, it's not just a diversity of color, diversity of thought, diversity of religion and
origin,
economic backgrounds, etc. What neighborhood I live in, so on and so forth. Abilities, you name it, right? And so the more buy-in we get, and if we get buy-in from, I think the gentleman from Corbett said, hey, you just have to get the headmaster to buy in, so there's less red tape when you're dealing with a private institution as opposed to Hillsborough County. We understand that. But we said also we want community advocates, so policemen and women, firefighters, even parks and recreation, individuals that are part of our community that serve in some capacity, even more so policymakers. And the gentleman that just left us said that when you look at the policymakers, they're made up of 70% white, but then you're making policy for 37% white, 40% black, or whatever the case may be. So the equitability of how we're spread out and who's making the policy is not necessarily even. How often we would do it would be once a quarter, we thought. It would be after school, but on school campus. We thought maybe once a month was a little too frequent. We thought twice a year wasn't enough. And so you want to start somewhere, but get a meaningful enough dialogue and have enough representation from all these different categories to be able to have an open discussion. We thought of maybe doing it like a town hall type format, where we maybe come up with like a half a dozen different themes, and we discuss those themes and then have different individuals weigh in, and also kind of just have some dialogue back and forth that was constructive and meaningful, and that would get us moving and at least talking about how we solve this thing and how we create barriers, or how we dissolve the barriers. One of the main issues, and one that I struggled with probably my whole life, was this. I think there's always, when you look at African Americans, maybe other minorities, we kind of understand what's in it for us. But let's say and I don't mean to broad brush this in any way, but if I'm a middle class white kid and I'm okay, and I don't have a safety issue and I feel safe in my neighborhood, why am I participating? And what's in it for me? I'm good. And not to kind of say it, in the frank, but you want to have them integrated in such a way that they understand big picture, how I fit in and how I become a solution to the problem. So that's kind of where we are. Did I leave anything out?
Wow.
Okay.
Can I offer two quick observations?
Sure.
We've done some work with introducing behavioral training in schools, and the idea of doing one at the beginning of school and doing one immediately after the holiday, because they're coming back and they need to be reminded, and then one after spring break. So 3 times a year is probably what you need to do, given the kind of ebb and flow of a school year. You might want to think about 3 rather than 4. And there's a rationale for it, right? You're using the holiday as a break point, but they need to remind kids. So something like that.
That's awesome.
The second thing, which I actually think is frankly more important, I think the problem of a Ferguson in Missouri is those kids never went to school with those white kids in those communities. They were racially segregated districts, St. Louis being a couple of the suburban districts. And so those policemen never actually went to school with kids. And I guess what I'm thinking about is if I do more with you, if I work with you, if I do something together. So I'm thinking of the vehicle being a community service project that is much more bringing people together to go do something rather than
a school collaboration with segregated schools.
That's right.
From the district, they actually assigned 2 very different schools kids to do one project together.
See, so I think if we can't deal with some of the segregation and that exists between our schools, although hopefully that's a topic we're going to deal with over time in this work if it gets going. But I'm just thinking, I think we learn more effectively about one another when we do something with one another, right? And so creating more common experiences so that we deal with this question, of which you can end with celebrations, you can, but to come and recognize what one another does, you know? I know I didn't meet a person of color until I was 13. And he threw a basketball in my face. 13. And I threw it back at him. Then he respected me. We could go play the game then. But, I mean, that was just an emotional reaction, you know? I'll throw it back. And so I think the more we can create common experiences, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I get to know you and get to, understand you.
So I have 2 questions regarding what you...
Just a thought.
One is, how do you get the leadership? So the issue is never the leadership that likes this idea. It's the leadership that doesn't buy into this idea. Now, the idea is if you want the kids who are most segregated and most racially divided to come together, they almost have to be forced to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want the community or the schools to bring them together in a community project, those kids aren't going to talk to these kids. They're just going to do what they need to do and keep going. And in fact, I don't know. So the question is, how do you kind of engage them in discussion with each other where it directly addresses this issue, but in a moderated field, right? So I think that the reason that we had been thinking about this kind of a summit was to get the leadership, the school boards, to get on board so that as a unit, kind of as what we had talked about with the previous AI discussion, as a unit, all schools have to have some sort of discussion. And then within that realm, there's area to play as to what is it exactly. The kids came up with like 100 ideas.
Well, I'm sure I would say talking to kids directly about the question though. What separates us, what brings us together? I'm not saying there should be some dialogue, but I think the dialogue has to lead to an interaction where I come to know you, right? If we were both all going off to a camp together, or if we were going to go, do the housing, what's that? Habitat for Humanity. We're going to go build a house in a neighborhood together. I mean,
just in addition to the dialogue.
That's right.
In addition to
What you're suggesting maybe is always a starting point. Right? And it's something we got to incorporate into our work. How are we going to deal with the issue in this community about your issue? Do we have a core value that speaks to in what we promote inside the school district? I'm talking just for the school district, respect it for a moment. Because you guys could also be, those of you who are really talented in this, is building more curricula that could be used with, because you got to help teachers deal with this too. Maybe they become a particular target audience that in a social studies course or in a current issues course. I know in outside of San Antonio, University of Texas State, they have a program where kids go into the community and do these historical studies about where these people come from, what are their histories. And that becomes, again, a chance to go interact with a person's history. And they bring along, they're a different group of people. They're a multicultural group who want to do these studies. You know, what is the history of the Indian community in our community, or the Muslim community, or besides the black community, Catholic community, whatever it might be? How do we come to engage common experience? I guess I'm coming back to that, but it follows your dialogue.
So how do we engage? I guess my question to the group is, which we were discussing, how do we uniform it, make it uniform or more uniform, so that every school has to do something, right? So like within the realm of...
Do you want to start at the middle school level, or high school, or elementary? Where do you want to start?
High school level, maybe. Or middle school would be a good place to start.
Younger at elementary.
Yeah, so how do you... So who are the leaders?
You talked about changing the curriculum. That's almost a paradigm shift from what the district has bought into as far as what we establish in the curriculum for our kids to learn. Because now you're taking away from something else. You have X amount of time in a day or in a school year, and so now how do you balance that out?
Go back to
What's the value in that?
Right. Like to learn international, like in the United Kingdom abroad, we learn about the entire world. So once we're integrated or working with them, it's not a culture shock. But here, the social studies system is very, very separated or isolated per se. It's made from a one-sided point of view, and the kids don't even get to see the other side. So it's like an addition.
I don't...
Globalize it, and whatever we have, and just add to it, not a separate period or a different topic.
I'm just thinking that I think there are probably teachers who teach in social studies who would like ideas and exercises that bring kids together to examine issues.
So my friends in public school who teach tell me that they're given a set curriculum and they need to follow a pattern, and they can't go outside of that. So I guess the question I'm asking is, the school system has to tell the teachers, okay, now you have this time or this space you have permission. And who is it that makes that decision? Which body of people make that decision, and how do we convince them?
Well, the board can play a role in it eventually, at the very least, it's starting this conversation. If they value it, if it's becoming, what we're saying is missing here is that there is no common set of values. What are we trying to do here? In this school, what are we preparing kids for? Well, we're preparing them for life. Well, a big part of life is how do you interact with people who are different than you. If you're a leader in any kind of business, how do you influence people to change and move in a direction? That is a life skill, right? So I think under lots of rubrics, you could argue this is a curriculum strand that we ought to be dealing with. How do you deal with conflict? Everybody talks about one of the fundamental...
There's a lot of inequities built into the assumptions behind your speech making that are not being addressed. And I'm just really having a difficult time following everything you're saying, because none of the underlying inequities that fund the assumptions you're making in your speech making are being addressed. And when you look at Hillsborough County, those inequities are cut right down the line in determining which of the 50 underperforming schools are underperforming, and what do the populations look like, what are the family incomes, what are the family household structures. All of those are systematic structural inequities, and there is just blindness to addressing the inequities and reversing the redlining that was intentional that created the system that we're in.
Can I just jump in 1 second?
I mean, I agree.
I look up here. There's not one word about schools. Everything that's wrong, people want to give to the teachers to fix. We need the communication skills and the openness to understand.
We know some of you are still needing to wrap up your presentations with each other and feed forward completely fine. In fact, we want you to finish doing that. That's really important. So finish up wherever you are in your feed forward with your moves. And then what we want you to know, if you're ready or once you're done with the feed forward, we want you to then take that feed forward and continue working it into your prototype. And then we're looking at the clock and different things we originally planned 60 minutes. We're going to say 45 minutes so that we can move to our closing together. So 45 more pitch for your prototype. Again, integrating in that feedback, that feed forward that you got. And imagine again, you're pitching this to a possible funder. So, create the name of your prototype.
4 words or less for the name of your
4
prototype.
words or less. And remember to, if you're uploading it into the social media or into our online platform and tagging it with Connect to Tampa 2019, so that we will fill it. All right? So we'll continue floating around, answering questions, supporting you, but in 45 minutes, have your pitch recorded and uploaded, and then we'll reconvene.
Do you have more questions? I think you're doing a great job kind of pulling us in to the group to pull it
Oh
in.
yeah, I think she was about to finish her
Yeah,
whatever
okay.
she was about to say. Joyce,
I think
Joyce,
that
you wanna
finish what you
finish
were
your
about to say,
statement?
please do.
first of all, I've been into a lot of different long-range planning where everybody gets and facilitates and problem solving. The beauty about AI, appreciative inquiry, is it's got a strategy that promotes positive thinking, acceptance, openness. It's very easy to get caught up on everything that's wrong. So the first thing before you gather, whether it's kids together, teachers together, community people, is to teach people appreciative inquiry. To be able to ask all the positive questions. What's working? What would you want to dream? So people begin to have a mindset of openness. Look at all the different people here. Because of this approach, most of us are looking for positive results. So that is number one to anything you do. And number two, to put it in the classroom or to teachers, unless we give teachers the tools, the verbal skills, the understanding, the experience, what are we doing? We're just putting more on them. Look, in schools, they have half days where they let people go. If you can legislate half days, you can also legislate once a week, 90 minutes longer that you stay in school, or that you start at a different hour, or that you bring people together after work, or something like that.
And that's kind of what Summit.
And
were
you
driving
said that
Right.
earlier.
Uh-huh. And I understand. So we were using teachers almost as a conduit to get it, as a catalyst to get it started. I think bringing in the community leadership, I think that's where the money is, quite frankly. So I would not want to put anything back into the teachers' laps other than trying to bring together everyone as far as, the population and, the attendance. But to put something in addition, in a curriculum, I don't know, it may be a little different.
Someday down the road, maybe, there's a lot of groundwork
Right.
that needs to be done, a lot of processes that add an openness to people wanting to work together, wanting for solutions. Like you talked about the kid who, this has nothing to do with me, but with awareness, then they begin to learn that maybe it does have something to do with me. So you're developing an awareness of differences. And I would say with race, what we say when we do the Pledge of Allegiance at our school, we say we honor the freedom that we have regardless of our race, religion, country of origin, ethnic background, and gender. And so if you're talking and we're opening it to all those issues. And how are we opening? And the word is acceptance, openness, and all the other core values that are associated with this.
You need a little bit more of her.
And then you're promoting positive growth. Positive, what will work? Okay, we know what's wrong. What will work? What can we think? What can we give to people?
I think our discussion was definitely focused on, well, how do we do that, right? What is going to work? And the kids had that's what all this other stuff is, where they talked about what are the different projects that they can do. But I think that the problem being that if one school integrates it, does not mean the next school is going to do that. So I don't work in the school system, but I work in the medical field, and the best example I can give is, we talked about 10 years ago the idea of physician well-being and burnout, right? It was a talk and it was a discussion, but there was no curriculum that the residency training had to do. And so if you took my training program in New York, we would go talk about it and they would say, well, we don't care because we need you to work and we need you to. Now, 10 years later, the American Medical Association says this is a problem. Every residency program needs to have in their curriculum for graduation a well-being curriculum. So now every training program across America has to have well-being training. They didn't really define the curriculum. They left it up to the residency program, but they said that they have to have a committee. So by doing so, they made it uniform across the board. So in that way, the hospitals that weren't, so the hospitals, I work in California now, the hospitals in California were much more on board with wellness and well-being long before. But now what it's doing is it's forcing the hospital in New York that's like, I don't want to, we don't care, to actually have to address that issue. So my question in this field is the kids have a ton of positive ways of discussing. You talked about like diversity debating where you have to flip, you're actually debating for the other person and that kind of thing, which is wonderful. But how do we make the people that don't want to do it or just don't want to have to deal with it, and the groups of people that actually accept it and say, okay, fine, we'll give you a little bit of time to do this. And that's why I thought the summit will make them come into a group. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to extend things.
I would say you just do it, right? So either you do it or someone's going to tell you how to do it. So sometimes the most convincing argument is one that you prove that it works. So if you can do it and set the benchmark and it's good, other people will follow. And then maybe that's right. So just do it.
You don't wait for everybody
to be on board.
You start. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Take the schools that are going to want to do it. So others are going to come along as they see that it's successful.
But in this appreciative inquiry method, is it not appropriate to talk about the history and to talk about the inequities? Are we only talking about positive things going forward, or do we actually acknowledge where people came from and what the history was? So, because that
last year we had a teacher, and this was his passion, and I worked with him to put together a diversity. It was an assembly, and we brought in people of different backgrounds to tell what it was like to grow up as a minority. We had race and religion and a country of origin. And the kids heard the story and they were spellbound. And they were all parents. The kids whose parents they were had to deal with it. And it was totally effective. And then they say how they overcame and how they feel and what they hope the world will be. So great sensitivity came from that approach. People who they respected and who were articulate and have shown what they can do with their lives despite feeling left out or whatever, and how they overcame it. So you're giving hope. And you're moving forward. And then people can later, when they get that, learn more about history. History doesn't have to be the first thing to feel it. History's up here for the knowledge, so we don't repeat it, right? And that we can do better, hopefully. Okay.
So Hillsborough County, a couple of years ago, the district passed a racial equity policy. But they never had a mechanism for operationalizing it. A great place to start is a summit. And put students and other people in the room and say, tell us what racial equity looks like to you. Because I'm certain that what it looks like